Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the TRC Tourism Trail Planning and Management webinar. We'd like to welcome you all to it, and apologies for that delay. We'll get started now. We'd like to start by acknowledging all the Indigenous peoples of the countries that are joining us today. So our agenda today is presented to you on the screen. Just to introduce our team and our panellists. TRC Tourism, which stands for Tourism, Recreation and Conservation, has been working in the space of trails planning and management for some 20 years. And our team of specialists today, myself, Chris Ord, Chris Halstead and Chris Rose, work in different areas of trails planning and have worked extensively across Australia, New Zealand and beyond on trails planning. Many of us have got a background in national parks and have been involved in trail planning with national parks. We've worked on many of the well-known trails around Australia and New Zealand, trails such as the Milford, the Larapinta, the Overland Track, from strategic through to on-ground planning. So looking at the various aspects of trail planning. And in the early days when TRC was working in the trail space, mountain biking was not such a trend as it is now today. And in fact, there was little mountain biking, and often it was seen as something that was quite a negative experience. So we've seen a great shift in the period of time that we've been working with trails from what was walking, where walking was a really strong activity, through to where we're looking at just as many people riding bikes and walking, and the trails necessary for those different elements. And we're also working with destinations and seeing destinations that can see the real value in trails as ways to attract visitors. So we're looking at trails from the perspective of for the community through to as a real driver of tourism in some destinations. So our agenda today will cover a range of areas, and we will send to you the slides after the webinar with also the questions. If you do have questions, you'll see the question and answer section that you can write your questions into, and we'll either respond to them there or else at the end of the webinar. So we have Chris Ord. Chris Ord's based in Victoria, and his background is in trail running and outdoor active, and he plays a strong role in the organisation of events associated with outdoor activities. We have Chris Halstead, based in South Australia, and Chris started his background with national parks and has been involved extensively with our team in planning for a range of different trail experiences across Australia and New Zealand. And then thirdly, Chris Rose, who's based in Victoria, and Chris has a really strong skill set in terms of the governance and management of trails, and working with clients to actually look at how best to look at the long-term sustainability of the management model for trails. So we'll work through a number of slides with the different presenters, and then we'll have the opportunity for some questions. So turning to the first topic, what makes a good trail experience? And I think this is something that we've thought about for many years, and there's a number of really important factors. But I have a couple of, I guess, mantras that many people have heard me say. And the first one's that while a destination might have world-class trails, it's the combination of trails and the overall visitor experience that creates a trail destination that residents are proud of and visitors seek out. So it's very much about a combination of factors that makes a good trail experience. The first one's the environment in which the trail is located. It's really critical from a user experience. It's important to have a range of different environments. You don't want to always be walking or riding on a beach or through a forest. You want different terrain, different environmental experiences. The environment, the management of the environment and the ensuring that the trail is sustainable within that environment is a really critical part of a good trail experience as well. The infrastructure that you provide obviously is fit for purpose. So it may be a gravel trail in some situation, it might be sealed, it might be a combination of rock boulders and fiberglass, for example. Each element will be determined on the actual needs of the user and the environment through which it's playing and the best opportunity that that presents. The range of facilities that's provided, that's a critical element, but it's something that varies with the type of trail experience and the location in which it is. So looking at each trail from the point of view of what does it need? Does it need good trailhead facilities, car parking, toilets, all those interpretation. So the importance of determining what's fit for purpose for that particular trail experience. The next is maintenance. And in terms of, it's very easy for us to get funding for capital works, but the maintenance is a critical issue, and a good trail experience is one where that is thought of right from the start and is looked after right from the start. And we often will say to trail clients, don't ever start to build your trail until you know how you're going to manage and maintain it, because it's a really big mistake when you actually create a great trail experience, but then you cannot continue that on into the future. So that relates to your management as well. Who is it that's going to be responsible for that trail? Ensure you've got that thought through. And finally, the services. A good trail experience may need a range of different things. You may need things like shuttle services to get people to the other end, or to enable them to be picked up from the end of a one-way walk or ride. You may need bike repair services, luggage transport services. There's a suite of different things that you may need to provide, and all these different elements combine together to create a good trail experience. So thinking it through from start to finish is critical. Moving on, in terms of the why trails are important for destinations, there's a whole suite of reasons why, the benefits that can be attained from trails within destinations. And economic benefits is the one that's very often thought of, and they certainly do bring economic benefits, particularly in terms of new business opportunities, bringing people into towns. But there are a suite of other benefits as well in terms of health and well-being, cultural benefits, social benefits. So all these are really invaluable and contribute to the future of a destination from a trails perspective. Next, we often think about trails at different levels, so categorising them from the point of view of the extent to which they will drive visitors to an area or are provided for local communities. And starting from the right-hand side of this slide, community trails are really are those that are actually used generally by local people. They'll often be managed by volunteer groups or local councils. They may be part of your transport network, but they're something that are used on a daily basis by residents within communities. If visitors come to a town, they will often use them, particularly if they're visiting family and friends. But at the next level up is our regional trails, and a regional trail is one where people will travel potentially 2 to 3 hours to actually do that trail. It may be known quite well around a region or indeed further afield, but it's a higher level trail than your local community trails. And at the highest end of the spectrum, we have national or state trails, and these are ones that will often be known nationwide. Something like the Milford Track within New Zealand is actually obviously known internationally. The Timber Trail in New Zealand is known across the country. The Great Ocean Walk in Victoria is very well recognised. So the level to which those trails are developed and the level of the experience will be highest at that national or state level, and going down that spectrum to the community trails, which are generally a locally based experience. So what makes your great multi-day trail experience competitive? At the present time, it's a really competitive environment. lots of people, lots of regions see having a great trail experience as a way to really attract visitors, but there's increasing numbers of them, and the market is not huge. So actually looking to make your trail really competitive, if you want it to be the centre of your destination, needs some clear thought and planning to move it from good to great. And some of the examples of some trail experiences that we talk about as great trail experiences: the Overland Track in Tasmania, the New Zealand Cycle Trail, which includes multiple elements, Larapinta Trail in Central Australia, the Milford Track, and most recently the Derby mountain bike region. So what is it that's common about those? They've each got a really strong point of difference, what it is in terms of the environment, the experience that makes them stand out, and having a clear point of difference is really critical. Often they're in an existing destination that has a high market profile, and you're actually leveraging that profile through the development of that experience. They'll be linked to complementary nature-based attractions, products and infrastructure. They'll generally have a range of accommodation options for the users. They'll generally avoid high volume nodes or trails unless that's a really critical part of the experience. And they're generally a seamless experience for the user. So there's something that's well marketed, really accessible in terms of bookings, and where the walk and cycle distance is geared to what the consumer's looking for. I'm just going to move on to touch briefly on COVID and the trends that we're seeing as a result of the COVID situation, because it's obviously something that's really hitting us all at the moment. And for the last 6 months, while we've been faced by the pandemic, we've seen a significant growth in people outdoors. Many people that traditionally were involved in indoor sports and indoor activities have been getting out to walk, to ride, to enjoy the environment as much as they can. So we're seeing growing use of trails by communities. We're also seeing a growth in domestic tourism, obviously as a result of closed borders and so on, and a growth in drive tourism. And that's again seeing more people using trails, especially with this growth in participation that's happened. And now people are actually, they're using trails when they're on their holidays and travelling around. We're also seeing that people who might have gone on international holidays are looking to what they can do in terms of, for example, great walks and booking into those new experiences. And the third area that I think is impacting is that government's seeing infrastructure development as part of that economic opportunity, improving the economy. And so there is quite considerable funding going into infrastructure, including trails. So we're increasing the demand, but we're also increasing the supply. And the challenge that we have there is to ensure that we've got the resources to continue to maintain those trail infrastructures into the future. I'm going to hand over to Chris Ord now, who's going to talk about trail planning and design.
Okay, trail planning and design is, I think, one of the most interesting parts of the whole trail development sort of sector. It's fun, it can be creative, but also it requires a fairly comprehensive understanding of three things: the context, the desired outcomes, and the proposed method, how you reach those outcomes that you're looking for. So it's like one big jigsaw, but unlike a jigsaw, you can't just reach for various pieces here and there. It has to be put into a logical stepping stone approach. Now, the diagram you can see on the screen at the moment gives the basic outline of that approach, put into two distinct phases. Stage one is the trail planning phase, and stage two is moving on through the design phase. Now, the planning phase is where you're reviewing the context. So be that the landscapes, the user profile and demand, what kind of trails are actually needed, and importantly, are the trails feasible from a number of perspectives? So will they meet the demand, and are they suitable? Is the environment suitable for the types of trails that you're planning? Are they financially sustainable? So again, going back to that long-term maintenance and management of the trail. How do they integrate into the destination location, and also the other off-trail experiences that you can have that will integrate with the trail and create a larger experience? And again, what is the viable management model? Importantly, stakeholder engagement is absolutely critical. So make sure that you're engaging with and getting early buy-in from the cultural caretakers, the community, the land managers, the governance organisations, and of course, the user, the intended user for that trail. Importantly, early on in the trail planning phase, you can juggle the order of that a little bit. Sometimes you do go to stakeholder engagement prior to coming up with the concept, because that stakeholder engagement can actually form what will be the trail concept. So that is context dependent. And again, most important, is it feasible? So you really need to get to that point of if it's feasible before you move to the actual detailed design phase. And that's where you start gathering your experts together to look at exactly what you're going to put on the ground. So planning is all about defining your context. What is the idea? What is the aim? And also, why is it needed? You really need to have that argument about why is this particular trail needed? What kind of trails are you trying to create? Who is the user? It's really important to understand that as trail use has grown, so has the fragmentation of the types of users using trail. And I think that's something that our industry is still catching up with, about how all the different ways that people are engaging with the trail. And also understanding the landscape, you know, what's possible, but perhaps more importantly than what's possible, what's appropriate. So you might have a landscape that a mountain bike trail is possible in, but might not be appropriate. So it's really important to understand, you know, what is appropriate. And again, what is feasible according to the cultural considerations as much as the landscape. What is, you know, do you have social license for, and what is feasible in terms of the management? Onto the critical factors for the design. So we've gone through the planning phase. Now we go through into the design. We've shown that a trail or a trail network is feasible. Now we go to the design where we approach the experts, we get them in. So you want expert builders, you want expert designers. And importantly, you need to consult throughout the entire process. Just because we've gone through the consultation process early on in the planning doesn't mean you suddenly stop the consultation. So it's important that you keep reverting back to those stakeholders that have inputs to a trail design. And again, just monitoring the impacts of what the actual build is. So once you have a detailed design, revert back to what will be the impacts of those specific design factors. Ensure that you're learning from previous projects. So obviously lots of projects have come before, and we'll look at a case study in a minute that needed to sort of draw on past projects, take the benefits out of those and apply them to the new context and purpose that you're working with. Engage with experts, as I said, and make sure that you're keeping to relevant standards and guidelines. So around trails, there's lots of safety guidelines, environmental guidelines, cultural guidelines that are set in stone, and you need to make sure that you apply the correct ones according to the trail that you're looking to build. And again, governance and sustainability. Make sure that you've got an eye on that ongoing funding. So the case study I mentioned, the Red Centre Adventure Ride. So this was a 200 kilometre proposal through the rugged West Macdonald Ranges in the Northern Territory in Central Australia. It was identified as an action in the Northern Territory Mountain Bike Master Plan, which TRC completed in 2016. We then moved on to a concept plan, which was done in 2018, and the Northern Territory government secured about $12 million in funding to proceed. Again, based on the fact that we'd shown that there was a feasibility behind this particular concept of a long distance multi-day stage ride through the West Macdonald Ranges. So the trail alignment, we then went into the landscape and looked at aligning the actual trail. Where will it go through that landscape based on what the outcomes were? So the considerations for the Red Centre Adventure Ride, which were quite large when you're talking about a 200+ kilometre trail that moves through traditional territories, it moves through a very rugged landscape, and there's lots of considerations around that. So again, it's that jigsaw that we need to sort of carefully plan. We needed to look at the route design, the challenges of the physical landscape, and the sheer distance that we're looking at, you know, covering 200+ kilometres from A to B, from Alice Springs out to a place called Mount Sonder. We needed to look at what features. So along that route, it actually parallels something called the Larapinta Trail, which is a world-renowned trekking trail. So we needed to make sure that we both met with the similar nodes, so the feature nodes that the Larapinta came into, but also that we stayed away from the Larapinta. We didn't want to impact on the walkers' experience, and we didn't want the walkers to impact on the rider's experience. It needed to be a separate but parallel experience through the landscape. Obviously, we need to consider the cultural integrations, and I'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. And essentially, what was interesting about this project was not just the sheer scale of it, but the fact that it was essentially a new experience that we were looking to create. There were, in some respects, similar aspects elsewhere around the world, in New Zealand and elsewhere in the world, where there's multi-day rides, but no real product that directly reflected it in terms of a single track, multi-day ride of that distance through that kind of territory around the world. So we really were looking at creating essentially a world-first product. And when we're coming to talk about feasibility, how do you prove something is going to be feasible when it hasn't been done before elsewhere, around the world? So we had to really look at taking elements from where things had succeeded elsewhere around the world and applying them to this particular case study. It was really important to obviously look at who is the user. Now, this is a very remote trail, so a little bit less about the community use. There's a lot of trails around Alice Springs itself that provide trail and ride use for locals and the community around Alice Springs. But this was very much more a tourism product. The locals will still come out and use it, but again, as a recreation, it nearly is a tourism product in and of its own right. So we needed to look at who the user was, and that was very much, we came down to a green skill level rider market. It wasn't about hardcore mountain bikers and big berms and jumps that you see in some mountain biking networks. This was very much about a journey through nature. How do we get people who are not necessarily skilled on single track on a mountain bike through such rugged and remote terrain? So that really dictated what we were looking at and where we put that route. So it was a multi-day soft adventure market that we were looking at. We had multi-levels of engagement, from fully facilitated to self-supported. So that's looking at one user might come along and go from end to end all by themselves, completely self-supported. So that would be towards the hardcore side of things. Also, we'd have a fully facilitated user. So somebody where, building on the local tourism business community, they are supported by a tour operator. And also within that supported operation, there's, the luxe adventure right down to the more hardcore adventurer who still wants to be supported. So we needed to look at things like safari camps and where they would be along the route, where they were environmentally sustainable, where they were appropriate in terms of from a cultural perspective as well. And the trail needed to be hop on, hop off. So whilst it's a 200-kilometre trail, we need to ensure that people could engage with it in small, bite-sized sections. And that obviously dictated how we aligned it. Really importantly, obviously Northern Territory is, strongly associated with traditional owner engagement. So we wanted to involve them from the planning phase, very much from the very beginning. We worked with the traditional owners as absolute partners, and we wanted to encourage that sense of custodianship, that we weren't just coming in and putting in a tourism trail, that this was something that they could be proud of, that it was a tool for empowerment and sharing of their culture. And importantly, a way and a means that we could sort of build practical skills, employment, and business opportunities for the traditional community there. So one important thing we engaged with this particular program was getting trainees to come out on the trails with us and help us actually align it. It's their country, they understand the country. And so we trained them up in terms of being, trail assessors, and also with a long-term view to how can they get involved with trail maintenance, how can they get involved with the tourism side of things, and how can they also get involved with even things like, bike maintenance, back in Alice Springs. So to make sure that they were engaged with that long-term feasibility in terms of employment and being involved with the trail. Most importantly, when we're looking at developing the Red Centre Adventure Trail, it was about protecting the natural and cultural values. So both of those are at the heart of all trail experiences. If you don't protect the environment and the cultural assets that surround that environment, then you're really doing harm to your own product. So at every step, we looked at protecting the natural and cultural values. And with that, I'll hand over to, speaking of protection, Chris Halstead for Sustainable Trails.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Talking about sustainable trails today, talking a bit about best practice sustainable trails, and I'll have a bit of a talk, a bit of a case study on the Kokoda track, which we've had a long involvement with, and how that's a really good example of sustainability in trails. So sustainable trails are ecologically sustainable and economically viable. What that means, at all levels, trails should make significant contribution to ecosystem health and community livelihoods and well-being. When we're designing trails, we don't just look at the trail surface, we look at the ecosystem health and the opportunities to enrich ecosystem health and biodiversity alongside the trail. That includes things such as restoration, rehabilitation and revegetation around the trail corridor. That's a really important thing. And sustainability is more than just building trails that hold together, as traditionally we talk about when we talk about sustainability. Sustainable trails are about the future delivered through a landscape and community approach. So yeah, trails are valued and supported by the community in which they're located. So if trails are popular, they provide a benefit, they will last and be supported. So sustainable trails can contribute to economic return, health and fitness, community pride, and contribute to urban and regional ecology. One of the things we've been involved with lately is, particularly with local government trails, where health and well-being are an important part of future growth in communities. So a lot of trails we're developing for people that might not often use trails. They might now get involved. There might be people with disabilities or the ageing population, developing trails that people are comfortable on and people will get involved with. So yeah, so it's about sustainable trails should be providing a return to communities, providing health, and also providing pride to communities. So they're sustained, they're supported by the community. That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. So how do we get there? Trail design puts the trail user at the centre of the design process, and you would have heard that already. You'll hear that all the way through this presentation. That clearly, the user is the centre of the design process. So we've got to consider the user. The economic sustainability of trails is reliant on effective trail design, construction, management, and maintenance. And when we design trails, sustainable trails don't necessarily require expensive infrastructure. You've got to make the most of the natural features of an area. And if you look at the centre photograph there on the Wineglass Trail in Tasmania, that's a really good example of integrating the local materials and the nature of the site into the trail experience without the use for expensive bridges, infrastructure and built structure. So plan the route so that you need the need for infrastructure such as bridges, switchbacks, retaining walls is minimised. And Chris talked about the Red Centre Adventure Ride. So the work we did on the Red Centre Adventure Ride looked at utilising the existing materials. There's plenty of rocks out there in the West MacDonnell Ranges, as you'd imagine, and the materials are generally right and good. But if you use the local materials, try to minimise the amount of built infrastructure you bring in. It's good for the economy and it's good for maintenance as well. You're limiting your maintenance. So you reduce your visual and environmental impacts, also mean a cheaper trail to build and maintain. And as we talked about with the Red Centre Adventure Ride, 200 kilometres, that's a very expensive trail to maintain unless you build it with that in mind. The typical things about trails the traditional way is resisting erosion through proper design, construction and maintenance and allowing it to blend into the surrounding area. It's not the purpose of today to do a masterclass in trail building and construction, but there's some clear techniques that have been designed over many, many years, and there's a lot of good information available how to actually build a sustainable trail. But I always think, when I was preparing this, I just provided at least a dozen points. I'm not going to go through those at the moment, but I think probably one of the first ones, the important ones, is do everything you can to keep the water off the tread, that's off the track, and the users on it. Obviously, we've got to work to stop erosion, and water is one of the biggest killers of erosion through grade reversals and contour trails and gradients, a whole bunch of techniques which are really important, but keeping users on the trail as well contributes to the sustainability of the trail. You do that by providing, well, a really good experience, having some good anchors on the trail, good places for people to look at, and consider the width of the trail, those kind of conditions when you're designing a trail. But people are going to be wanting to walking two abreast, or is it a single track kind of a trail? Those are the kinds of things you need to consider. And trail planners, professional trail builders and trail communities place great focus on understanding the needs of the trail users. Within Australia here, we've got some good systems. We've got the walking track grading system. We've got the mountain bike trail difficulty rating systems. These are designed to coordinate and link the trail user to the type of trail that you're planning. The reason I'm bringing this up, it's important because you do that. You link the trail, you design the trail, you build the trail for the users, as we keep saying, but also the maintenance of the trail. The trails need to be maintained to the original design and to the users. At times we're seeing, particularly maybe with mountain biking, where trails are designed to the mountain bike trail difficulty rating system, which green is the easy trail, blue are the intermediate trails, and black are the more difficult trails. But if your maintenance isn't up to scratch, your green trail can start morphing into an intermediate trail, or your intermediate trail can start morphing into a black trail, which can cause problems for comfort for users, and then you've got issues with safety and all sorts of things, but an impact on the experience. So that's about sustainability, getting it right from the start, getting the right link with the right users, and then the maintenance to follow. So, in summary, put the trail in the right place and ensure trails are fun, fit for purpose, and sit within the very best sustainable trail corridor when you're developing sustainable trails. I'll move on now to talk about the Kokoda track experience. When we talk about sustainable trails, we've called this the reality, because out there on the Kokoda track, it's reality. It's reality for the people that live along the track. They are looking for benefits. They're looking for a future for their kids. They're looking to protect the land that they love with the biodiversity and the environment. And yeah, as I probably mentioned, they're looking for livelihoods as well for a future. So that's all about all the things we talk about with sustainability. So out there on the Kokoda track, I've had sort of 11 years experience with the Kokoda track with TRC and previously in another life. And I've seen the changes in the trekking industry over there and some of the issues that have arisen. But we'll just talk through. I've got a few questions that I'll answer for you, and it'll start to develop the picture for the Kokoda track. So the Kokoda track, who lives out there on the track? Well, the traditional landowners live out there on the track. There's the Kawaris, the Biagis and the Orokavo people. They live out there, they work in their gardens, they work as trekkers, as guides for trekkers, porters for trekkers, and they sell a few bits and pieces, and they have guest houses and all that sort of things out on the track. So when things are going well, pre-COVID times and other disasters that have happened on the track or whatever, there's a reasonable return for the people out on the Kokoda track. So what does the track traverse? Well, it traverses the Owen Stanley Ranges. So if you're in your mind's eye, you look at a map of Papua New Guinea, it's sort of to the northeast of Port Moresby. So it runs through the Owen Stanley Ranges up to about 4,000 metres. Mount Victoria's the highest point on the Kokoda track, and then it arrives at Kokoda, which is sort of the end of the actual the trekking part of the track. It includes forests and swamps, dense forests, fantastic forests, orchids and tree kangaroos and all the kind of things, vertebrates, all the kind of things you'd expect on a fantastic PNG trek. It's got swamps as well. You walk through the swamps. It's got rivers, high-flowing rivers, as you can see on the photograph there. It's got steep, long ascents, which is a bit of a feature of the track. One of the things, certainly where I come from in South Australia, you don't generally get 1,000, 2,000 metre ascents, and it's got descents. You go up a hill and then you've got to go on the other side, often with exposed clay soils and erosion and all those sort of things. So who are the users of the track? Well, the traditional landowners have been using the track for thousands of years to walk between the villages and to get to their gardens and for trade. There's a lot of people moving up and down the track. There's a lot of people migrating. A lot of the Highland people are migrating to Port Moresby at the moment, so that they use the track. Mostly it's Australians that go trekking on the track and experience looking for the Australian Second World War heritage. Who benefits from the track? Well, the principal landowners benefit from the track, from the resources the track corridor provides. In recent years, they've had collectively made decisions about the resources because there's a lot of gold, a lot of copper, a lot of forests up there. We've seen some of the impact on the forests, and it's questionable sometimes of the return and the benefits to the people from the forestry. But some years ago, people had a choice. They could choose mining for copper and gold on a part of the Kokoda track, but there's 20 different villages, 20 landowner groups up there, and 19 out of 20 decided that, no, we don't want mining. It doesn't fit with the future for our kids and everything else. Sure, it's a short-term return, but they supported the trekking. So the trekking has been supported. So what the landowners have decided that they seek the benefit from the trekking through that's trekking permit fees, through guest house rental, through providing guides and porters, and as I said before, the trekking fees that come through the Kokoda Track Authority, which is the managing authority. And also the Australian government and the PNG government contribute quite a bit to the communities up along the track. Australians benefit by having the Second World War heritage protected, maintained and accessible. And within that, as I sort of mentioned a bit before, what the kind of trekking experience that trekkers are looking for and the trekking companies are looking for is to provide something that's a bit reminiscent or a bit like the World War II experience. So tough, crossing the creeks on traditional bridges, getting a bit muddy and getting a few leeches and really having a tough experience out there. But that's sometimes can be in conflict with what the traditional owners and the traditional landowners are after. So the Kokoda Track is the Papua New Guinea's premier land-based tourism experience. So what are the issues for the track? Well, it's obvious COVID-19 has a significant impact on PNG and on the Kokoda Track. Things have stopped. No trekking, no revenue coming back into the people from trekking. So that's a significant problem for people that are relying on it for their livelihoods and the sustainability of their economy. As I said before, the Australian government and the PNG government are doing a really good job of contributing and right now and evolving and changing for the needs of the Kokoda Track people. Sustainability across all areas of the track. Part of the work that we did last year was, and as you can see on the photographs there, was assisting the local people rebuilding some of the timber bridges across the track. This is fantastic stuff. This is really great. And if you can have a look at the video that we've attached to this on a QR code, have a look at the video at some of the work that these fellas are doing and the women are doing building these tracks. And you can see the photo of that guy walking across with a log over his shoulder. I'm just astounded by what these guys can do. And they're always doing it with a smile on their face. It's just quite remarkable. Have a look at that video. But if you're building timber log bridges across creeks like that every year after the tropical downpours, and the last 2 years it's been significantly high, have washed away the bridges. We were trying to design the bridges to make them a lot higher out of the flood heights, but the flood heights just seem to get higher and higher. So and you look at the timber we're using, so the sustainability around the bridge sites is a bit of an issue with the forests. So that's one of the issues. The long-term challenges as well to sustain the livelihoods of the people along the track. As we say, they have a choice. Trekking and the trekking industry, the trail has been fantastic for them, but they need to be finding the future and get their access for their kids to go to school and kids to develop. The guys out there want the same things as we do with our families. We want kids to succeed, families to succeed, economic benefit and some good livelihoods. So the options, the people have to choose for benefit. There's a lot, as I said before, there's a lot of support with the area becoming a future conservation area, but the people need the benefit, need to provide the benefit, and it's their land after all. And also, so the issues is to retain the wartime experience for the track and for the trekkers who are coming along to experience that. So what is the future? Sustainable future is sought with the traditional landowners and their livelihoods and their benefits. As we've said, it's come from trekking, and there are other benefits that they have up there. The future is continuing their connection with culture and their pride. That's a significant future. It's a benefit for them. They look at that video. They're just really happy doing the stuff they know, living in their forests, living in their gardens, but they need to have a future for their kids and everything else. Now, some sustainable future around tourism product as well. The track, the trail is just a fantastic experience, and it's an iconic world-class experience. But it's time to start to evolve and do a bit of work on providing some more sustainable bridges in a traditional style, but also some future new tourism opportunities, I think, that start to evolve. So it's not just all about trekking. There's some other opportunities where Australians and other people from the world can look at some of the amazing forests and some of the wartime experiences as well. But the important thing is that we ensure that there's a sustainable future for the people, the landowners, the Kawari, Biagi and Orikabo people out there on the track. And so they can continue their lives with pride and present and showcase their wonderful land to the community. Okay, thank you. Now, hand over to Chris Rose, who will talk about trail management and governance.
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and I hope everyone's travelling well in these difficult times. Trail management, I'll be trying to be quick because we were a bit late starting, so hopefully you'll get the salient points from this part of the presentation. Next slide, please. So why trail management or governance? And please, if you're a trail manager out there and you hear the word governance, don't fall asleep. It is important. Governance is essentially the decision-making framework that you put around the management of the trail. So it includes a whole lot of inputs and considerations to get the model right, because every trail and every destination has a different set of circumstances. But some of the things that you might want to think about, or that we would encourage you to think through before you start building, are things like the land tenure, the legal arrangements that you want to have put around the trail. Who do you need to collaborate with, and who are your partners involved in the trail management and construction? What skills do you want? What business opportunities do you want? How do you want the flow of benefits from the trail to be accounted for, and who do you want them to go to? So that's just a snapshot of some of the things that we would encourage you to think through. Next slide, please. So the legislation is one of the first pieces of the puzzle. Now, if you're working on private land, it's a completely different set of arrangements that you need to take into account. But a lot of the trails that we work with clients on are on public land, whether that be in New Zealand or in Australia or elsewhere. And the public land legislation differs by country, by state, and so forth. So it can get complex. Certainly in Victoria, we're working with a couple of clients where it is very complex, and we're still working through the vagaries of old legislation to try and find a solution for that specific problem. Defining the risk is important. So who owns the risk to the user, who owns the risk of the trail, and importantly, the risk to the environment and the cultural features that might be part of that trail. They need to be taken into account, and in fact, they should be first and foremost in the considerations. So what are the types of governance that you might put in place? First, probably area to look at is your non-legal types. So that might include a partnership arrangement. It might include a memorandum of understanding with some other partners. And particularly where your trail might traverse across multiple tenures. So it might traverse from state forest through to Crown land, through to national park, through to any other sort of land, and it might include private land as well. So what are you trying to achieve out of that? You're trying to achieve a great experience. What do you need to do with a great experience? You need to make sure all of the partners are aligned. You may need a binding agreement. The New Zealand model works very well, where you have trusts, charitable trusts formed that bring partners together around the management of trails. In Australia, we tend to move more to incorporated associations, or where the trail does traverse through a park or a forest primarily. We can use mechanisms under each of those acts, like leases and licenses and so forth. Again, it's very hard to be generic around this because each circumstance will be different. The next slide, please. Thank you. Just drawing on an example in Wellington, where we worked with the Wellington Regional Council and a whole raft of partners there, from local territorial authorities, councils, through to national government agencies like the Department of Conservation. The objective here was to build what was a fairly disparate or fairly localised set of trails into a regional trail offering that really could position itself not only for the local residents, but in a marketplace where they weren't previously recognised as being a place to go, as a destination of significance. And so one of the things we did with all of the various partners was bring them together and form a non-binding sort of agreement, utilising an existing arrangement with the Regional Chief Executives Forum, where all of those various agencies on the left side of the screen that you can see, their chief executives already met. So we formed a separate group under that, or we recommended it. And importantly, and I know there's been some questions around how you engage with the community that we'll come to in a moment, but we recommended the tie-in of the community, because a lot of the community use these trails as their local backdoor recreation and health and other sort of forms of exercise. We didn't want to lose that. So the Community and Industry Engagement Forum was really important. All the partners threw in some money. That essentially helped bring the framework to life. A regional trails framework advisor was employed, and you'll see the URL down the bottom of the screen there, Wellington Regional Trails. I won't go into too much more detail, but I encourage you to have a look at what they've been able to achieve in the last couple of years. It's fantastic, and Wellington really is on the pathway to being a great destination, pun intended. Next slide, please. Thank you. So why do this? So importantly, a shared vision. Again, if you're working with a range of partners that may not share the vision or may have different aspirations, starting with this very clear vision is a really important part of the governance or decision-making model that you put in place. It has to be suitable for the destination, so there's no point putting in place a company board for a destination that's going to attract a couple of hundred people. Similarly, so it's got to be right sized. Similarly, we'd recommend more formal structures where you are trying to build a destination of scale or a series of products of scale. Stakeholder engagement I've referred to, but it's important to not lose sight of your locals, your community, because ultimately the benefit flow from whatever you're trying to achieve, a part of that has to go to communities. They have to see that. Common standards, we often talk around the notion that you don't want to be riding down a trail and every several hundred metres as you move through a different land tenure, seeing a different sign talking about the different regulations and different standards that apply. It needs to be a seamless experience to work in the marketplace. The beneficiaries need to be understood. So in this, we talk around things like, will there be fees and charges attached to the experience? And if so, where will those fees and charges go? Will they go to the management of the trail, the maintenance of the trail? Will they go to the government that often puts them funds back into the maintenance of that trail? Will they go to business? Will they go to the community? Will there be a dividend? So all of those types of things are a part of the consideration around your management model. And of course, importantly, better business opportunities. So business and public land management often don't necessarily work hand in hand. We believe it's important, particularly when you're trying to build a signature product, that the business can deliver great experiences on the trail, as can the trail manager. So that's just a snapshot there of some of the benefits of getting your governance model right. Next slide, thanks. So just a couple of tips here for your consideration when you are looking into this. Leadership, where it is shared across, where the trail experience is to be shared across multiple tenures or multiple forms of land. Who's going to lead? Do you elect a board? Do you have a leader? Is there a natural fit for one organisation or one person or one group? Importantly, managing the risks, including environmental and cultural risk, is really critical. When we often talk about risk as trail managers, we talk around the risk to the trail user, but the environment and cultural risks are paramount and form a key part, not only in the planning, but in the considerations. The management of maintenance, as Janet mentioned earlier, maintenance, you've got to think about that at the start. And certainly we try to form models where any fees incurred can then be put back and reinvested into the trail. The standards, I've talked a little bit about the benefits, the benefit flows, and importantly, the finances. So how are you going to fund the trail development? How are you going to fund its ongoing operation? How are you going to continue to improve it? There's some of the questions that we encourage you to think through. I think that's the end of my formal slides. So what we might do is just quickly, and I know it's 12:05 and many of you may have to go, but we'll just move to a couple of questions. And there was one from Nick King out at Haunted Hills, which I thought was a good question. I might just ask perhaps Janet to answer this one very quickly. What are the 5 skills a trail manager needs to be successful?
Yeah, Nick, I'll unmute myself.
Yep, you go.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Nick. And I see you're working on the Haunted, or involved in Haunted Hills. I think there's a number of things. The first one is probably good communications and stakeholder relationships, because you're going to have a lot of both government and non-government stakeholders that are involved in your work. So being able to work with them effectively. Secondly, probably good contract management and good team management, because you'll have a suite of different people actually developing your trail network. So actually the ability to work with those. And allied with that will be good financial management, because with many projects, if you've got effective project planning, you'll be able to come in on budget, but certainly that some of the variations that come in will make that a challenge for you. And I think also being able to delegate, because you're going to have a lot of different people working towards the fruition of your network. So you're unlikely to be the person who's actually doing the technical elements. You're going to be working with others. So I think they're probably the core skills you're going to need in that role. Good luck.
Thanks, Janet. We also had a series of questions around consultation, and there was a couple of themes in this. The first was, how do we bring together that sense of social license, particularly with local communities that might not be responsive to the trail upgrade or development in their area? And the second theme around that consultation was around how do we get that social license and sense of support, particularly who do we engage with in the initial stages of the trail planning? Chris Halstead, I might just ask you to talk a little bit around the engagement process where we particularly where we're starting that planning of a trail experience.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. It's about clearly identifying who the stakeholders are. And when we talk about the stakeholders, we're talking about obviously the users, the people that are going to benefit or be influenced by this trail. Yeah, it's in a lot of the work that we do, we get quite close to talking to the people that are going to be the end result and beneficiaries of the trail, and talking to them, really get an understanding of what the experiences they're looking for within the area, and also some of the local issues and local issues around sustainability and what are the best alignments. That's the kind of thing we're looking at when in the consultation process in the early stages. It's really getting the intelligence on the ground about what's going on in the area.
Thanks, Chris. There's another question here which I think is probably important. We've talked around some of the engagement issues. How often do you feel that monitoring and evaluation of the visitor experience is incorporated into the planning process? So it's a really important question around monitoring, not only at the start of the project, but all the way through. Janet, are you happy to have a go at that one as well for us?
Yeah, sure. Look, it is something that's really critical. It's important in terms of at the start of your process to think through your monitoring, because you want to know who's using your trail from the start, and then you can benchmark any trends over time and growth in use of the trail. But it is something that is often overlooked. There's lots of different approaches to doing it, from on-ground physical monitoring through to actually checking in on the visitor satisfaction with your experience. And that data that you collect is also really important in terms of, if you're looking for funding, being able to actually tell the grant fund process who and how many are using your trail, and potentially the economic return you're getting as well. So actually looking at what people are spending. There's a whole suite of elements that are really important, and it's often overlooked. It is something to think about at the start of your process and build into that planning.
Thanks, Janet. There's another question here around governance, which I'll just have a quick crack at, and that is from Anna. Is there a governance framework that's popular with councils for larger trail projects in Australia? And then Anna goes on to give an example where in the US there's a whole series of components that can be factored in. The short answer, Anna, is there's not. Many of the trail projects, the larger ones here, that are on a single land tenure and being developed by a single agency, that agency tends to manage them by themselves. So there's probably not a need for a highly constructed governance arrangement. But more recently, we've been seeing proposals put forward that really maximise the visitor experience. And to achieve that maximising of the visitor experience and minimising of the natural and cultural impacts of the trail, that we've had to use multiple land tenures, and that's where it gets tricky. So again, in Victoria, there's a couple of examples underway at the moment where we're trying to find the right mechanism under legislation that was written in the 1950s. So the government recognises it's an issue. We're trying to help clients work our way through it, and it's a work in progress. In New Zealand, there's a whole raft of different mechanisms that are used, from, as I mentioned earlier, Trails Trusts through to a thing called the Great Walks. So the short answer is there's not a model, unfortunately. I'm noting it's nearly 12:15. Janet, there's a few unanswered questions, but I might hand back to you to wrap up, and then we will also try, I think, to get some general answers to some of these questions through to the participants. Hand back to you.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, we will respond to the balance of the questions that we haven't got through. So thanks everyone for your input and for raising all these interesting questions as well. We are keen to keep the interaction going. I think many of you will have seen our ebook, The Recreational Trail Planning, Design and Management Guidelines. That is still available to download from our website. So for many of the things that have been asked today or that we've talked about, there's quite some further detail within that ebook. So please feel free to download that and hand it on to colleagues and so on that might be interested. And the other thing is that the other source of information will be our Sustainable Trails Conference, which is to be held in 2021 in Alice Springs. That was scheduled to be held this year, but as a result of COVID, we've pushed it out to early June next year, where we believe we will actually, we're confident that that timing will work and we will get together the New Zealand and Australian and other experts that we have at our previous two conferences. So look, thanks everybody for your participation. Please, if you get onto our website and make sure that you're on our database if you want to receive further information about the work that we do or what's coming up. And feel free to get in touch. Thanks again, everyone, for your participation.